Hello there everybody, Brandon here coming to you again on the channel. It's been a little bit of a while since I posted something. It's been a little bit of working another job now, getting things settled in a new house, all that blah 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 that you don't care about anyway. We're going to do another quick project here where we've taken what was a Happy Halloween pumpkin board, and on the back of it we're going to turn it into this. So if you want to have a look at this process, paint along with us, let's do it now. Alright, so what I actually have here is a wooden piece of home decor that was purchased from a store that says Happy Halloween on this side. It was just a Halloween piece that we had out for decoration. It's just a piece of wood here, and they've got some grooves in the wood to kind of give the pumpkin illusion, where they've just painted just an orange, monotone orange on this side with the Happy Halloween. So what we're going to do on the back side of this is paint hopefully a little bit more realistic looking pumpkin. It's going to be part of just our fall harvest decor here at the house. So when the Halloween is over with, we can use this for the next month or so as we get closer to Thanksgiving. So what I'm going to do is start with just a base color of orange. Now if you watched my videos before, anytime I do a pumpkin that is in another scene on a canvas or something, I usually do a dark background color of what my pumpkin is going to be in its darkest value first, and then I paint my lighter highlights on top of it. But because the bulk of this pumpkin is going to be a much lighter value, instead of painting the whole thing a dark value of orange, I'm actually going to paint the whole thing in a much lighter value that I want my highlights to be on, and then I'll just add the darker stuff because there'll be far less of the darker paint on here. So the first thing I am going to do here is get real artsy and technical on you, which if you know me, that is a joke. I'm going to take literally a paper plate here. I've got some cadmium orange hue here that I'm going to glob on there with just a touch of medium red, and red can go a long way, so it's just going to be a tiny little bit, and maybe a little bit of yellow ochre just to tone it down just a hair. And we're going to just cover this entire pumpkin with that mixture. So this is a good bit of cadmium orange, again just a drop of red basically, and a little bit of yellow ochre. I got a 2-inch brush here to cover some ground, and we're going to mix this up just right on the brush. Again, careful with that red, it'll go a long way in a hurry. We just want a little bit to kind of tone it down. Don't need much. But I do want it looking more like a pumpkin and not a bright orange blob. So alright, now we're just going to cover this. And this particular piece of wood started with white on the background here, and we'll see how that affects it. I don't think it's going to bother it a whole lot. If you're painting on a different colored piece of wood, that's entirely fine. Sometimes wood will absorb a lot of paint, so if you're on plain piece of wood, you might want to cover it with a base color first, or a primer of some kind. Now I am going to keep these brush strokes and getting this initial color in kind of in the direction of what the pumpkin would, the shape of the pumpkin is. So I'm going up and down a little bit, rounded on the edges. So if we're leaving any brush strokes in there that'll be visible at the end of the day, it'll just add to the shape and character of the pumpkin itself. We don't want to go laterally across here. We want to shape our pumpkin with our brush strokes. Now, as I'm finishing up this first layer here, I'm trying to get out any unwanted brush strokes where I've maybe stopped and started a specific stroke or pass. This is acrylics, so these are going to dry pretty quickly. I'll let this dry and then we'll come back with a second layer of this to start really defining how we want this thing to look in terms of color and shape. Now while that's drying there, I am going to take just a touch of raw umber and with the same brush go ahead and put a glob of that up in here for our stem. I'll just put it right on top of the brush I was using, because when I come in with my second pass of orange down here, I'm not going to care a whole lot if I've got a little bit of this raw umber still in the brush as well. It'll be totally fine, and we can even carry it down a little bit where this is visible. Maybe down in here a little ways, like that. Who knows, right? Whatever you feel like doing. Alright, so now I'm going to give that just a minute to finish drying there. You can see that I just touched it with my finger. It's got a little bit of wetness still there. I'm going to let that dry a few more minutes and then we'll come back with a second pass. Alright, so all I'm going to do now is come back with my 2-inch brush again and basically more of that same mixture and just create a second pass. Just to give us some more coverage. If you'll recall, I left just a little bit of raw umber in the brush from that last pass where I colored that stem in. And so if we get a few streaks in here of that raw umber on this pass, that's actually perfectly fine, if not even desirable in some cases. So I'm just continuing that shaping brush stroke, if that's what you want to call it, where I am making my brush strokes kind of in the shape of what our pumpkin is going to be, so we don't have any confusing marks in there. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do now, I'm going to come back with my same 2-inch brush that I've been using. And if you look at a pumpkin real closely, they're actually kind of, for lack of better words, kind of splotchy in their coloration because of all the little undulations on the surface of them. So I'm going to say that my light source for this is going to be pretty much coming right from the center, whatever's shining on it, because we're going to be putting this basically in a little alcove area, and for it to look kind of realistic, it's going to look like light's coming in right dead center. So the outer edges will be a little darker than what's in the middle. The middle will have the most highlight and reflections going on the surface of this pumpkin. So on these outer edges, I'm going to go back into my orange mix that I've been using, but I'm going to add just a little bit more red to it and just a little bit more raw umber to it to create my darkest shadowy splotchy edges here. And I'm just going to use the end of that brush and just kind of tap in some of that darker color, because again these pumpkins are, because of the surface characteristics of pumpkins, they look kind of splotchy. But I'm going to put in the darkest stuff here along these edges. And you can see just with the little bit that I've got there now, you know, it's starting to create a little bit of three-dimensionality to that, if that's a word, three-dimensionality. I'm sure it's something similar to that, but anyway, the point is I am starting to blot in this darker color on these edges where the light is not reflecting as much, especially down here along the base. And we're starting to create that shape. We'll come in on the other side and do the same thing. And I'm just tapping this brush in, so it's creating all kinds of little textures. I'm doing this. And ultimately, you'd have to be pretty close to this piece of home decor when it's all said and done to really notice all this texture that's going in, but it's good to know that it's there anyway. Now I'm starting to shape this up a little bit. I like what I see over here a little bit better than what I see over there, so I'm ultimately going to come back over here and try to recreate the same fade, if that's the word I want to use, of my darker to lighter color on this side as I've got going on over here. I just like the way this side turned out a little better, at least initially, from looking at it. I add a little bit more cadmium orange back in my mix to lighten things up. We can do a little better job of fading that color back out. So I just again lightened up my orange value a little bit to fade back into that dark. and then trying to keep my darkest stuff out there on that edge. There we go. Now you can already see, if we flip this back around, what the other side looked like. Here's what their monotone orange Happy Halloween, everything's the same color. Now if you just look at where we have gotten to this point, just by varying up our orange values a bit, we're starting to create something that actually looks like it might be in the shape of a real pumpkin. So I'm going to continue to work my fade of these colors in to where it kind of gradually goes from the darkest values on the edges, whether it's the bottom or the sides, the top, whatever, to where my lightest values are going to be towards the center of this thing. That's where the highlight's going to be coming from. And I'm just basically creating a three-dimensional round object on something flat is all I'm really going for here. Feel like I need things to be a little bit darker in the far corners there. And I need things also to be the darkest right along the bottom. Now we can start to shape out a little bit of this pumpkin in terms of where the grooves and the ridges are. Wherever we want to define some, I feel like there's got to be one right here where I'm going to have that stem coming down. And that's going to be right in the center, but over here on these edges, there may be a couple of places where some darker splotchiness is going to creep in. So while I've got that value on the brush, we're just going to hit a few random places. Now I'm going to start defining out a little bit more of my brighter areas. I'm going to go straight into the Cadmium Orange and start tapping that value in, because again they're kind of splotchy in appearance, so I'm not just going to brush it in. I'm going to start tapping it in, starting here in the middle where I know things are going to be the brightest, just so I don't get my values too far off of where I want them to be. And I'm going to start tapping in that orange. This is going to keep my textures consistent in terms of the overall finished product here that I've been tapping this brush in. For the overall appearance of the skin, if that's the word I want to use, of this pumpkin, it'll stay consistent. I've been tapping in my colors here with this larger brush, so it'll have a uniform feel to it when it's done. This will pretty much remove the last of any of the original brush strokes that you really could see. So now I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to come back with a much smaller brush. I'm going to come in with a little 1/2 inch wash brush to start defining out. Actually, it might be a 3/4. It's a 3/4 inch wash brush I'm going to come back with and start painting in some of the individual little creases. Alright, so with my smaller brush now, I'm going to start to put in some of the more defined ridges that are in this pumpkin. I'm going to start by going right along some of the obvious lines I've already created. There's going to be one coming down from this particular area here where part of that stem is going to be coming down. So I'm going to drag one, and these things aren't perfectly straight, these creases aren't. They kind of wander a little bit as they come down a pumpkin, so you don't have to worry about drawing a straight line here. Right now I'm just going to kind of put a streak through there about where I want it to go. And we're going to have to come back and do a few things to this. So right now I'm just getting the basic idea of where it's going to be. And then I'm going to, as that paint is basically drying up off my brush, I'm going to soften up the edges of that. Basically either side of the center of it. I'm just softening up the edges a little bit on either side. I think I want a little more red in that there, so I'm going to add more red to that mix, putting some red into that color. And this is just me personally looking at it. Once I put it down there, I just felt like I wanted it to be a little more red. You can go with whatever makes you happy. I wanted a little more red in there, so I'm going to put a little more red in there. I'm going to do the same thing in a couple other places. Really dark up here along this top edge maybe. And you put in as many of these as you want your particular pumpkin to have. I need one more. Right out in there. All right. It gives us a basic starting point of where our ridges are going to go. And now I want to do a couple of things to them. I want to soften the edges again a little bit. So you may have to touch your brush into a tad bit of water to get things to move around a little bit if that's necessary. And I'm going to soften the edges up just a little. So I'm just going along the edge of each little crease that I made and just kind of rubbing that brush in there a little bit. Like I said, may have to put just a tiny bit of water in on that brush to get those things to move around a little bit. Just softening my edges up so I don't have such a hard line between my colors there. Now we need to just put in little details around these things to make them look ultimately as realistic as we want to go with it. Now again, this is entirely up to you as an individual artist of how much realism you want to put into something, how much you want to keep it loose brush work, or a little more on the impressionistic side of things. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to come in here and add some highlight touches to add to my realism a little bit, because I like to lean towards the sides of realism. I'm still using that little brush to put our creases in with. On the front edge of all of my creases here, I'm going to tap in and lighten up with some of that cadmium orange just a little bit on those front leading edges. Where that surface is going to catch a little bit more of that light. Everything that is front and center here ultimately will have the brightest highlights on it. When I get done with this, so I'm going to tap in my brightest colors right here in the middle. Now the areas where I put these creases in, I'm going to come in with some of that darker color with a little more red tint to it. Try to get my darkest areas defined. And then work out from them a little bit by tapping. That will again further soften my edges on those creases. So again, I'll put the darkest piece where I want it, and then introduce a little more of my orange as I tap away from that, and that will continue to soften some of those edges up a little bit further. And again, working with acrylics, if you need that paint to slide and move a little bit more, you can add a little bit of water to your brush there. Just touch it in a little bit of water. This stuff doesn't slide around quite like oil paints do, so you have to be a little more willing to make it work for you. I definitely do like oil paints for lots of applications, but we are doing this in acrylics, so you got to make the paint work for you. Now that I've gotten my creases a little more defined how I like, I'm going to come in and put a little bit of brighter highlight on the outer edge of some of these along the left and right sides here, because that's where that would be catching a little bit more light on that rounded portion of the back side of that crease there. You don't have to get too carried away with this, but I'm adding a little bit of highlight on what would be the surface that would be mostly facing us directly, that would be catching some of this light coming from the front. Same thing over here on the other side. The outer edge of that crease, brighten things up just a little bit. And then save our absolute brightest stuff, where I'm going to come into some titanium white now and put in just a few places of real bright sheen right in the middle here. And again, this is another thing you don't want to get too carried away with. And then we need to introduce some of that white shimmer right in the middle of our crease here in the center, because you would have a flat spot right down the center of that, believe it or not. That would also reflect. And again, this might be overkill for some of y'all, but it's what makes me happy, right? Extra little detail there. Don't even know how easy you can pick that up, but trust me, it's there. And maybe you pick up just a tiny bit of it on these creases here. Now we need to do something with our stem up there. I'm going to get a little bit of raw umber back out. Actually, I might add just a touch of, let's add just a touch of Sap Green in there on it for kicks and giggles, right? A little bit of Sap Green, a little bit of raw umber. And let's do some stuff up here. These things usually have like a almost like a braided twist look to these stems, so we're going to have a few brush strokes here in this vertical fashion. I got a little bit of something coming down right here that I want, and a little bit of something right there. See if I can't knock that glare out of there for you. Now that we've got that, I'll add just a hint of titanium white to that mix again to create a few edges of highlight. Doesn't take much. Just a little bit of something in there to show that there's a little something going on. Maybe right on top of our little finger that's coming down there. I'm getting pretty close to satisfied with that. I think I'm going to add just a hint more of my white highlights of reflection in the middle of this, just because I want to. I want to brighten that up a little bit more right in the center. I think I'm going to call that done. You can see there where I just tapped in a little bit of highlight there. When you come back and look at that a little bit from a distance, that gives us a nice 3D looking pumpkin on a flat surface. Again, we compare to where we started. Here's what monotone and orange Happy Halloween looks like, and here is what our pumpkin looks like. Hope you guys got something that you're pretty happy with. This one's gonna look good sitting up above our fireplace. Until next time, happy painting, everybody.